Chapter 11. Learn what? If, according to Consciology, the purpose of life is to expand one's awareness of consciousness, it is obvious that education is held in high esteem. But here also, the world is divided into those who search after authority and those who search after what is. And here also, it is as though it were through the looking glass. Things are not as they appear. The searchers after authority have constructed magnificent edifices of learning, but they are dedicated to the search after authority. They are dedicated to searching without finding, or finding and rejecting and searching some more. The search after what is scientific. It analyzes all of the possibilities, rejecting those that do not meet the criterion and accepting those that do. As has been stated previously, a defining characteristic of the search after authority is dishonesty. It analyzes all possibilities, affirming those that meet the criteria. Then, without apparent reason, a supplementary test is introduced. Only those that also pass this second unspoken test will be acknowledged as having passed the initial test. The second test is, does the solution come from within the individual, or does it occur outside of the individual? If it is found to occur outside of the individual, the results of the investigation that have proven positive will be acknowledged as being positive. If it is found to occur within the individual, the results of the investigation that have proven positive will be announced to be negative or inconclusive. The bias of the searcher after authority is that individuals alone are without worth and attain value only as part of a group headed by an authority. This bias is not a reasoned conclusion. This bias is a deep-seated emotional fixation born out of depression, born out of desperation. It will be supported at all costs. Any dishonesty, almost any desperate physical or mental act against another individual, and even against individuals they hold closest, is fair game to prevent the acknowledgement of anything that would appear to promote the individual above the group authority. Does this begin to take on the appearance of an addiction? Is rock bottom defining the extreme point beyond which almost any desperate physical or mental act against another individual is sanctioned? Is being forced to discover this point the birth of the recognition of the inner life of the individual and the death of the search after authority? If it is the discovery of the individual self that liberates one to begin the honest search after what is, then most of what passes as education must be recognized as the scaffolding supporting the search after authority. In the chapter on trade, it was discovered that while business is the native ground for nurturing the searcher after what is, it is nevertheless ironic that most employees of businesses are searchers after authority. Similarly, in the field of education, where the search after what is would appear to be paramount, the field is peopled primarily by searchers after authority. However, the radicalism of the searcher after authority in the field of education is much more extreme than most searchers after authority employed in business. The searcher after authority with a vocation in business usually is able to find a comfortable hiding place and is not normally called upon to justify or even identify one's philosophical stance. Not so in the field of education. The educator must not only expose one's intellectual biases, but must be prepared to logically defend them. So the searcher after authority in the academic setting is much easier to identify than is the searcher after authority with a business vocation. Likewise, the searcher after authority with an academic vocation will experience a much more unstable philosophical underpinning than the average searcher after authority. Most searchers after authority search only peripherally, devoting most of their attention to handling the common problems that constitute everyday living. The academic, on the other hand, must investigate the matter more deeply in order to convince young students. It is likely that this deeper investigation reveals to the academic the impossibility of discovering the sought-after authority. Logically, at this point, the outward search after authority would be discarded, and the inward search after what is would be undertaken in earnest. But that does not happen, not immediately. At this stage, the academic becomes a search after authority who has discovered that the search after authority is doomed to failure. This may be a conscious realization or only a nagging conclusion that one tries to banish from consciousness. Regardless of the degree of consciousness it occupies, it is an uneasy philosophical position to reject both the search after authority and the search after what is. Thus, this academic, who secretly recognizes the impossibility of the search after authority, is consumed in an emotional crusade seeking to become this same authority that one knows can never be. This duplicity creates an academic that espouses reason but lives by emotion. Obviously, when the Consciologist refers to learning, the reference to expanding one's awareness of consciousness, the reference is to expanding one's awareness of consciousness and searching after what is. The searchers after authority and those who seek to become the authority espouse a very different concept of learning as regards the field of education. To them, learning is what the learning authority says it is. It need have no practical application and need not even be substantiated by the natural sciences or other educational disciplines. Thus, knowledge derived by the experience of individuals and confirmed by empirical proofs may be spurned by the academic, unless its discoverer has the proper scholastic degrees and credentials that would support one's claim to be the bearer of knowledge. Its value is simply ignored. Without the imprimatur of the educational elite, verifiable knowledge may be deemed to be counterfeit or highly suspect. If it can be said that the aforementioned white-collar hoax infects business, the infection in the academic field can be termed epidemic. Knowledge, or the skill to teach, is held in little regard without the proper string of academic initials following one's name. To the Consciologist and the searcher after what is, genuine knowledge is treasured wherever it is found. The purpose of life is to expand one's awareness of consciousness, and knowledge about expanding one's awareness of consciousness is revered, as well as those who are skilled at teaching others the methods that will expand one's awareness of consciousness. John Bradshaw has done groundbreaking work in identifying the importance of the family. In his work titled Bradshaw on the Family and Others, he has defined the importance of the family in the psychological development of its members. Probably it is his work more than any other individual that has enabled family counseling to help so many to understand how their particular family circumstances molded their particular psyche for good and for ill. John Bradshaw possesses several high academic degrees, and yet much of his work is openly ridiculed by academia because his degrees are not in the specific psychological field in which he has contributed so much. How is the searcher after authority to know what parts of his work are valid and which are not, unless the authority so indicates? Of course, the searcher after what is takes personal responsibility for one's individual judgments as to what is valid and what is not. But the searcher after authority is too consumed by fear and the self-knowledge of one's own deceit regarding one's personal quest for knowledge that it is unthinkable to trust one's own judgment. One must desperately cling to whatever the authority proclaims to be the accepted knowledge. This spectacle of the blind leading the blind is not likely to lead to expanding one's awareness of consciousness. If we are to learn and to be taught only what the authority decides is safe to let us know, then it is obvious that no expansion of one's awareness of consciousness is going to occur. Cub reporters learn journalism by studying the 5 W's and H. They are the who, what, when, where, why, and how that are to be included in the lead paragraph of every news story. But human beings are cub reporters of life. And life must answer these 6 questions. Philosophy tells us who human beings are. Natural sciences tell what things are. History tells us when things happen. Geography tells us where things are. Psychology tells us why human beings act as they do. Economics tells us how human beings act. Consciology is the philosophy that contends that 1, everything is consciousness. 2, human beings strive to increase their awareness of consciousness. And 3, this will result in a minimizing of conflicts and maximizing of human well-being. Consciology contends that this defines who human beings are and the ends they seek. With the ends determined, it is only left to discover the means by which they can be accomplished. The means are represented by the cub reporter's how question. It is economics that provides the means for achieving the ends that philosophy seeks. It is economics that interprets how the means produce the desired results in the record of history. The experiments of natural science in every geographical location, and in spite of all the variations of human beings as reported by psychology. The cardinal sciences are philosophy, natural science, history, geography, psychology, economics. If one were pressed to put them in order, economics would have to come first, and the others would follow as subheadings beneath it. For human beings are acting creatures. Human action is required to sustain life. Human actions provide food, clothing, and shelter. Philosophy is important because it answers the questions, who are we and what are we here for? We need to know who we are in order to select goals. Natural sciences are important because they define what exists. We need to know what makes up our environment. History is important because the past provides data on which to build. We need to know when things happened and in what sequence in order to attempt to judge the cause and effect relationships. Geography is important because it answers the question of where events happened in order that we might analyze spatial relationships. Psychology is important because it answers the question why. Why do human beings behave as they do? Economics is important because it attempts to answer the question of how all aspects can be brought together in human action that will achieve the goals that philosophy has chosen. By analyzing the natural sciences, history, geography, and psychology, human actions can be selected that will provide the means, economics, to the desired ends, philosophy. The natural sciences, history, geography, and psychology provide raw data, but they are static. They do nothing. It is the science of economics that takes the data and does something with it. Economics provides the means whereby human action does something to reach the philosophical goals and ends. All of the sciences, save economics, are comprised of staid and static data. Only economics, the science of human action, is active, gets things done. An earlier chapter defined the functions of the mind as reason and emotion. Each influences human action. One's ultimate emotional desire is to act in such a way as to achieve one's goals, philosophy. Reason analyzes the natural sciences, history, geography, and psychology. To the extent that this analysis is honestly performed, weighing all of the available data, the result is a reasoned basis for human action, economics. The proper economic reasoning will result in human actions that will achieve one's emotional, philosophical goals. Having the plan is philosophy. Executing the plan is economics. The freedom that human beings experience is freedom to choose between available choices. The science involved with making those choices is economics. If humanity interprets the first 5 of those 6 disciplines correctly, if humanity interprets the first 5 of these 6 disciplines correctly, the result is nothing. Good intentions, but no action. Economics is the action science that merges them all into behaviors that realize the sought-after goals. Free trade is the economic catalyst that guides human actions that maximize human well-being. The desired ends, philosophy, are achieved by human actions dictated by the means, economics. Economics is the how that makes everything else work. Economics identifies the value of ownership and the means for transferring ownership among human beings. Human beings could conceivably master all of the other sciences, but without a mastery of economics, conflicts abound and human well-being remains at a minimum. Of these 6 disciplines, certainly economics has suffered the most at the interpretations of educators dedicated to a search after authority. But the next most distorted is history. To the modern educator, economics does not exist as a primary discipline and has been demoted to little more than a division of statistics. History, too, has all but disappeared in something called social studies. History is acknowledged as significant only as a record of government accomplishments that it interprets as the primary focus of social studies. Is history a history of government or a history of individuals? Do different points of view make any difference? Title: A Mini History of the 20th Century United States. Open parenthesis. Events selected by searchers after authority and explained by searchers after what is. Close parenthesis. The century began with Theodore Roosevelt extending the power of government over national parks and business trusts. In 1913, the Federal Reserve System was established so that the government could gain more power over business. Then came World War I and Woodrow Wilson's attempt to create a world government. The 30s brought the Great Depression and Franklin Roosevelt's great expansion of government. Early in the 40s, the U.S. entered World War II, followed by the establishment of the United Nations as a rudimentary form of world government. The 50s brought the Korean conflict and further extension of government power. The Vietnam War covered parts of the 60s and 70s. The Watergate exploitation of government power occupied the middle 70s, with the 70s ending in runaway government inflation of the money supply. This resulted in the election of Ronald Reagan and an attempt in the 80s to curtail government expansion. The 90s brought the presidency of Bill Clinton and renewed government expansion. The end of that part. Are these truly the events that identify the 20th century? Most represent extensions of government power that reduce the power of the individuals, and extensions of government power that reduced the power of business to freely trade in ways that would maximize the well-being of the individual. The wars also added to the power of the government over businesses and individuals. The Great Depression of the 30s was the result of the formation of the Federal Reserve System that permitted government power to mismanage the money supply. Is it factual to present the 20th century as being a tableau of the extension of government power over the individual? Is that all there is? Is the story of the 20th century a story of the disappearing significance of the individual? It is, if one wishes to approach history from the point of view of the searcher after authority. Isn't there another point of view? Is the story of the individual in the 20th century a purely negative tone? Title: A Mini History of the 20th Century United States. Parenthesis: Events selected and explained by searchers after what is. Close parenthesis. A history of the 20th century United States is a history of individuals, of vision, who directed businesses that were able to maximize the well-being of all individuals without stealing from any individual. It is a history of improved transportation by automobile, truck, rail, and air, improved communication and entertainment by telephone, phonograph, radio, motion pictures, television, VCRs, facsimiles, and internet, improved human comfort, better housing, indoor plumbing, air conditioning, electric lighting, and work-saving appliances, longer lives with vitamins and bodily replacement parts, and the engineering achievements of skyscrapers, dams, highways, and bridges. Then computers raised the usefulness of each to a whole new level. End of that. Lest this appear to be a history of crass materialism focused solely on the physical world, consider that each of these physical improvements impacts consciousness. They impact individuals as individuals and individuals working in businesses. Businesses are better able to maximize human well-being when transportation, communication, entertainment, and human comfort are improved. Individuals relieved of a constant focus on the physical needs of food, clothing, and shelter are liberated to focus on enhancing all aspects of human consciousness. Unfortunately, time liberated is not automatically time well spent. These are individual human beings, and each does spend the liberated time well, in quotes, as defined by that individual's needs. These are individual human beings, and each does spend the liberated time well, in quotes, as defined by that individual's needs. So the question becomes, well spent according to whom? According to Consciology, time well spent is time devoted to expanding one's awareness of consciousness. This means that one is constantly in a learning mode. If that sounds dull, then we are failing to communicate. The Consciologist is genuinely searching after what is. The search has progressed from being a search after authority through an attempt to become the authority to the present search after what is and an honest and factual approach to living. This search has progressed through many stages, and each progression, though difficult, has been rewarded with new insights on life that have enhanced the joy of living as a result of each progression. In fact, the greatest possible joy that a human being can experience is the result of discovering a greater appreciation of one's soul, one's essence, one's consciousness. By definition, according to Consciology, the greatest happiness results from expanding one's awareness of consciousness simply because one's essence is consciousness and at one-ment with humanity and the universe and ultimately unlimited complete perfection. A genuine understanding of this concept means that this learning is synonymous with the greatest happiness. It is not dull. It is an adventure with each new discovery rewarded with enhanced rewards and increased prospects of ever greater happiness. This does not mean it is easy. It simply means it is possible and it is worth the effort. But this is not most human beings. Most human beings are still on a hopeless quest, searching after authority. Such a quest is not happy. It is full of failed plans, dashed hopes, and emotional depression. When one confronts the hopelessness, nothing appears to be left but to join in the conspiracy and become one of the authorities. When this too fails, one's addiction is revealed and a complete emotional collapse occurs. This hitting bottom has perplexing consequences, for it marks the birth of a new level in self-conscious individuality. The quest to become the authority for the group has failed, but one does succeed in becoming the authority over one individual, one's self. This genuine self-government liberates one to devote one's attentions to learning and expanding one's awareness of consciousness. For those human beings who have not yet made this discovery, this liberated time on their hands could be seen as a curse. Not having any internal guidance, they are anxious to follow the lead of whatever authority captures the public fancy of the moment. They learn the joys of unrestrained sexual pleasures and the convoluted intrigues that result. They learn the joys of mind-altering drugs and their empty promises. They learn a score of seemingly innocuous ways to squander time, from indiscriminate watching of whatever is on television to becoming involved in spectator sports or participating in sports or gambling or virtual reality games. All of these ways of consuming time can contribute to learning, even learning that expands one's awareness of consciousness. But like anything, in excess, they become toxic. This should be fairly obvious in all but possibly virtual reality games or computer games. These are so new from a cultural standpoint that the problems inherent in their excesses are not yet fully apparent. At first, negative comments about computer games would appear to be comparable to the assaults that religious groups have made on every avocation that appears to bring human beings pleasure. They tell us sex is not good. They tell us gaming is not good. Take a game that everyone enjoys playing, and suddenly it becomes bad. Poker is a great game. Craps is a great game. In the days of the Old West, the great games of dominoes and pool degenerated into domino halls and pool halls. These are all great games. They are great vehicles for learning. Dominoes teaches math. Pool teaches physics. Poker teaches psychology. But in excess, they teach how to waste lives. That's unfortunate, but it is mainly a victimless crime, harming only those who come under its spell. Then came computer games, an entirely new breed. Poker is fascinating, but it's a game in a deck of cards. No one has any difficulty separating it from reality. But the reality threshold has been breached. And it doesn't even take virtual reality games to do it. First, there are the realistic auto racing games. Sure, you know they are just games. But to try to win the game, one is likely to try to cut in front of traffic that one would never consider doing were it not just a game. If the stunt fails, you lose the game. You hear the sound of brakes screaming and a mighty crash. That's all. No pain. No extended hospital stay consuming your life savings. No disruption of family life and losing seniority in your job. If you try for it and fail, you only lose a game. But what if you try for it and it doesn't fail? It works and you win the game. You learn to take other bizarre driving chances, and they also win games for you. You become a power to contend with in auto crash computer games. You would never let these experiences affect your actual driving decisions. But one day, driving home after a particularly trying day, this little car cuts you off and blithely spurts ahead of you, and all you can think of is, she can't do that to me. And the rage takes over the wheel, and your very existence depends on being able to cut that car off at the next turn. You would never consider such an act, except you know you can pull it off. You've done it often in computer games. The problem is not that virtual reality games seem so real when you play them. The problem is that they can tend to make reality seem unreal. In this instant, you dismiss the consequences of failure as just a noise and a flash, when it's actually a noise and a flash, plus pain, and a life that will never be the same if it continues at all. Do the family members realize that they are signing up to drive in a winner-take-all grudge match in the family car? These games are marvelous, but recognize that in excess, they can decidedly color one's driving in the real world. We know this is true because psychology has verified the power of mantras employed by religions and many schools of advanced learning. Fervently repeat what you want to occur. Believe it will occur. Say it over and over. Picture it happening. Experience your feelings after it occurs. This is positive thinking. Call it prayer. Call it casting a spell. Call it transactional analysis. Call it seership, voodoo, thought transference. But call it effective. The key point is the psychological fact that the mind doesn't know the difference between what one perceives as reality and what one tells the mind it perceives as reality. Actions that are completely foreign to an individual become less foreign with each repetition of an affirmation swearing to its validity. Someone who sees oneself as unattractive begins to perceive oneself as attractive the more one tells oneself how attractive one is. The line between perceived reality and virtual reality is simply not that well defined initially, much less after an attitude adjustment. Now take this one step farther. The game changes from auto racing to Mortal Kombat. The participants experience beheading the opponent, disemboweling the opponent, hideously disfiguring the opponent. By whatever grotesque means imaginable, the opponent is barbecued and massacred. But it's all a game, isn't it? The mind knows it's a game, doesn't it? Well, doesn't it? The mind is very gullible. It believes to be valid what it is told is valid. No games. On the one hand, it is great that computer games enable one to experience the feeling of negotiating a turn at unbelievable speed and daring that enables one to win the race without having to risk life and libido to accomplish it. But sooner or later, it will become necessary to recognize that the effects of such emotional experiences are closely akin to mind-altering drugs, and they share the same negative baggage. The problem with LSD, for instance, is that one imagines that one is repeatedly experiencing jumping from a fifth-story window. The problem is that most of the time the experience is imagined, except that one time it is not imagined, but real. Trouble is, a person under its influence can't tell which experience is real and which is imagined until the terrible thud when one hits the ground. The desensitization that these games foster creates a desensitization of society that must eventually bring harm to us all. The golden rule cannot save us if the vengeance that others feel is unlimited, regards their computer combat foe, and they really can't tell the difference between how the computer foe looks and how we look. This new mind-altering drug may prove to be the most dangerous of all. Perhaps killing is no less to be avoided, whether the confrontation is between two human beings or between human beings that animate the moving shadows on a television screen. What is important is not what the gun is pointed at, but the intent of the individual pointing the gun. If the killing of human beings is to be avoided, it is the mindset of the killer that is to be avoided. In order to prevent the killing of other human beings, it is the urge to kill that must be confronted. Whether the urge is directed toward human beings or shadows on a screen may be superfluous. The computer term of garbage in, garbage out might also apply to the human output resulting from ingesting computer garbage. Learning is required to progress from error to knowledge. It is futile to expect criticism of the evils of the games people play, or even criticism of the evils of religion or of government to bring about real change. Games, religions, and governments represent individual choices for satisfying individual needs. When individuals learn that these needs are capable of being satisfied out of one's own resources, the outward structures will be vacated. Like shells on the seashore of life, they will be abandoned by their hermit crab dwellers in favor of more suitable quarters.